Thank you everyone for coming to the San Francisco State Creative Writing Department's Pathways to Publication panel. Thank you to the George and Judy Marcus Fund for making this panel possible tonight. Thank you to the LCA events team for helping us set up the webinar. And thank you everyone who's attending. And I'd like to especially thank our panelists tonight. I'm very fortunate to have such an esteemed group of writers. I'll just read the short bios, and also want to thank my co-host, Andrew Joran, who is the graduate coordinator for the MFA and MA program at San Francisco State. So first, Kalia Yang, thank you for coming. She is a Hmong American writer. She's the author of the memoirs, The Late Homecomer, a Hmong family memoir, The Song Poet, and Somewhere in the Unknown World, and the children's books, A Map into the World, The Shared Room, The Most Beautiful Thing, and Yang Warriors. She co-edited the groundbreaking collection, What God is Honored Here, Writings on Miscarriage and Infant Loss by and for Native Women and Women of Color. Yang's work has been recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Chautauqua Prize, the PEN USA Literary Awards, the Dayton's Literary Peace Prize, as notable books by the American Library Association, Kirkus Best Books of the Year, the Heartland Booksellers Award, and garnered 4 Minnesota Book Awards. She wrote the libretto, The Song Poet, based on her memoir, the first Hmong story adapted for the operatic stage. It will debut this March. Thank you so much, Kalia. And then Ruben Quesada is the editor of a hybrid collection of essays, Latinx Poetics, Essays on the Art of Poetry, collecting dozens of Hispanic and Portuguese poets. He is the author of Revelations and Next Extinct Mammal Poems. He teaches in the MFA program in creative writing at Antioch University, Los Angeles. He has served as poetry editor for Agni, Pank, and Pleiades, and as a poetry blogger for the Kenyon Review and Plowshares. His writing appears in the New York Times Best American Poetry, American Poetry Review, Kirkus, and Harvard Review. He is the 2022 Nonfiction Committee Chair and on the National Book Critics Circle Board. Thank you so much, Ruben. Joan Gelfand has published reviews, stories, essays, and poetry in over 150 national and international literary journals and magazines, including the Los Angeles Review of Books, the San Francisco Chronicle, Pank, the Huffington Post, Rattle, Voice and Verse, Sycamore Review, and Prairie Schooner. Her poem, The Ferlinghetti School of Poetics, was made into a short film by Dana Walden. The film featured at 20 international film festivals and was awarded Best Poetry Movie at the World Film Festival. You Can Be a Winning Writer, The 4 C's of Author Success, Joan's book for writers, is a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And her debut novel, Extreme, was published this year in July. Oh, excuse me, in July of 2020. And Joan is an alum. She is a graduate of San Francisco State University. Thank you so much, Joan, for joining us tonight. And then finally, but last but not least, Frances Kai-Hua Wong is a journalist, poet, artist, essayist, and activist focused on issues of Asian America, race, justice, and the arts. Her writing has appeared at PBS NewsHour, NBC Asian America, The Emancipator, PRI Global Nation, Angry Asian Man, Cha Asian Literary Journal, Kartika Review, and Drunken Boat. She teaches Asian Pacific Islander American Studies at the University of Michigan. She co-created a multimedia artwork for Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, and she has written 3 chapbooks and a new book of poetry, You Cannot Resist Me When My Hair is in Braids, from Wayne State University Press. So thank you, Frances. So please join me, everybody, in welcoming our distinguished guests. It's such an honor to have you here all tonight to talk about your pathways to publication. So I'm going to start with a question that I know our students have wanted me to ask you, and that was, what was your first publication, and how did you get this piece published? So I'll just kind of go around. I'm going to go, I guess, in reverse order. So let's start with Frances. What was your first publication?
Highlights magazine. When I was in 4th grade, there was a book review. They at the time, they would if you wrote a book review, they would pay you, I think, like $5 or $25. I think it was $5. And in 4th grade, $5 is a lot of money. Unfortunately, publication rates are about the same these days, but But yeah, I wrote a book review about a book called Old Bones.
Old
Which was
Bones.
it was about a horse. I was into horses then. So but that was my first publication. And I just sent it in and they chose it. It got published and I got paid first thing.
This was your first step on this path. Fantastic. Okay, let's see. Joan, what was your first publication?
I had to mute myself because Frances made me laugh so hard. I'm glad you went into the Wayback Machine, Frances, because my first publication, I was the poetry editor of a women's newspaper in Berkeley. And these women had started a magazine called Women's Spirit Magazine. And they invited me to submit. I submitted 2 poems. They took them, easy peasy. But that's kind of how it was back then. Now it's a little bit more of a fight, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, that was my first publication.
But it's important to start somewhere, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
there's always the first step. Okay, so Ruben, what was your first publication?
I was thinking back, and it was my senior year of high school. It was like this assignment that was given to us for extra credit to submit work to the LA Times. I decided to forego the extra credit. I had a friend send my work in anyway, and I ended up getting it published. So yeah, LA Times. It was just random.
Damn, that's a fantastic first publication. Great, fantastic, thank you. And Kalia, what was your first publication?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining all of us today. My first publication, so first paid publication, we'll go there. I had just graduated from the MFA program at Columbia. I came back to St. Paul to finish my first book, and my sister and I opened up a tiny writing office so I could finish this book. We were sharing a bowl of pho noodles every day for lunch because we didn't have enough money for 2 bowls. But I saw that Lantern Press had this writing contest, and Lantern Press is, a vegan press, and I'm a Hmong. There are not a lot of vegetarians or vegans in the community, but I saw this thing and I saw that the prize money was $1,000. And so I sat down to write this essay to the men in my family who love chickens. And to my surprise, I won. And then they published me via Saya magazine. And that was my first real reading audience in terms of a professional paid audience.
Fantastic. So different pathways. So now I'm going to ask you more about like your first book publications. But first I want to remind all the participants, please, if you have questions, go to the Q&A tab and start putting your questions in there. And then, once we start getting some questions, and I know I see Peter Shong is there. Peter, this is your opportunity. I'm calling on you. Put your question in chat or put it in the Q&A. I know you have them. Okay, he's so excited. He's a Hmong student, and he's so excited that Kalia Yang is here. He's been talking about you for years. So just gonna say that. Okay, so first book publications. Ruben, what was your talk to us about that? What was that process like?
Sure. So I'd been writing poems for many years. I started off at a community college in LA. I went to East LA College. After deciding to put off going to college, I was going to go study English at San Francisco State. And so I was just writing, and eventually I ended up staying in Southern California just to stay close to family. Went to UC Riverside, one of the only, I think, other universities in California that has a creative writing department. And one of my professors there, encouraged me to put work together and start sending it out to contests. We had some visiting writers during my time there, and one of them was a writer named Gary Young. Gary Young is based out of Santa Cruz and a big prose poet. And at the time, I still do write a lot of prose poems. So Gary Young became very interested in the work that I was writing, and we developed a relationship. And over the years, I'd share work with him, and he runs a small independent press there. And so he asked me to send some poems, and he published my first book when just as I was gosh, about a decade ago. So he runs a small press there called Greenhouse Review Press, and he also does letterpress, print work. So that's where Next Extinct Mammal came out into the world, and so it had a lot to do with just really establishing a relationship not only with my own professors but with visiting faculty. So that was my entry into getting a book published.
Great. Thank you so much for saying that, because I see we have a number of students. I recognize names. So again, this is like, this is the relationship you're forming now while you're in school, and this can help you, throughout your publishing career. May I ask, Ruben, was that your thesis, or was this did it become your thesis?
That it was my undergraduate thesis. Yeah. So I finished my undergraduate work in 2004. And the book came out in 2011, and so during those years between undergrad and eventually I went to grad school a few years later, I revised a lot of the undergraduate work. Yeah, so being in school and writing those poems and making them work in workshop, and just keeping an eye on them, and eventually I had enough poems together to shape into a cohesive collection, and that became the first book.
That's fantastic. I'm so happy. I'm so happy there's someone who got their undergraduate poems published as a book. So if there's any undergraduate students here, think, the work you're working on now, it could become a book. It can become a book. Here is an example of that happening. Joan, how about you? What was your first book like? What was that path like?
My first book was a collection of poetry called Seeking Center. And I was very involved with the Women's National Book Association here in San Francisco. And there was a reading, and I was at an open mic. I read one poem, and the publisher asked me for my manuscript.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fantastic. So, so students, just so you know, we have plenty of open mic opportunities, the Take Place reading series, and there's many open mics around the city. So, open mic, think about that. That's an opportunity to share your work. It could lead to your first book publication.
That's happened to me twice.
And that's happened twice. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
How about Kalia? How did you get your first book published?
I want to say that I'm finding it very interesting listening to all your stories. Thank you. For me, so I had gone to New York City to become a writer. I was enrolled in Columbia's program. Somewhere in that lonely sea of people, I realized that while I could not choose the beginning of my story as a human being, I could choose the beginning of my story as a Hmong American writer. I knew then that I would be one of the first. And so I thought real hard, and I decided to come back to Minnesota to publish my first book. Agents were courting me, and they court you by giving you free books. So that was wonderful. I thought that I could come back and, if things didn't go well, then those agents would be there. That's how little I understood the industry. Those agents are, the turnover is incredible. But I came back to Minnesota, and I spent a year working on and making this book as good as I could make it. I wrote back to those same agents. None of them were at the houses anymore, and nobody knew who I was. They didn't know who the Hmong people were. One agency wrote back and said, "Do Hmong people even read books?" And so, in a moment of heartbreak, I thought to myself, Minnesota is home to some of the finest independent publishing houses in the nation. So I Googled independent publishing presses. Coffee House Press came up first. I went to their website, and they said, the whole screen was black, and they said in white letters, "We want to publish the underrepresented voices in literature." And I said, that's me. So I followed their submission guidelines, sent in, the query letter, the first 3 chapters and the outline, and then finally they asked for the whole book, and I sent it in. 2 months passed, and nobody said anything. And so I decided, okay, I should start looking at other publications or possibilities to publication. And then I got this email and Chris Fishbach said, "You are the writer that I've been waiting for." And so I met Chris and he said, "I want to publish your book." Monica Lewinsky had published a book, had gotten a book deal the year before, and she had gotten $10 million for her book deal. And I knew that I wasn't Monica Lewinsky, but I thought I was a better writer, maybe. And I said, "Chris, how much are you going to pay for it?" Chris said $3,000. $3,000 for all of that heartache, all that work. And my older sister, who had just become a very young attorney, says, "Galia is worth at least $3,500. And Chris said, "Fine, $3,500. So that was how I got Billy Homecomer into the world. And I want to say that 3,500 has, it's made over $100,000 in just royalties. So advances and what you actually get in the end, these are different things. It's a question of how much you believe, how much the press believes, and of course, always a question of luck and fortune.
Thank you so much for that, for being so open and honest about that. And I have to say, I mean, as someone who publishes frequently with independent presses, I'm so glad that you found your first home and such a great home with an independent press. And I think this is also something interesting for students to hear, that, if you find a great indie press who really loves your work and is going to get, their muscle behind it, then, it can launch a fantastic career. And for people who haven't read The Late Homecomer, it is an amazing, amazing book. I remember when I first read it, I was blown away by the breadth and depth of this story and the storytelling. And it has won so many awards. It's been an NEA big read, so it has really reached the stratosphere. So think about that. Independent presses can do better for you sometimes than a big commercial press where you're just going to be one of the many. So thank you for sharing that. Frances, what about your first book?
I started off with a chapbook. So I had a friend who wanted to do an art show, and he was going to sell all his photographs. And I'm like, well, if you're, and then he asked me to help set it up. So I did a lot of work to set up this art show for him. But the what do you call it? The concert house that was doing the art show said they wanted me to be a part because I was local and I knew people and I would be able to bring people. And so I thought, well, if he's going to be selling all this stuff, I want to have something to sell too. So I put together this chapbook, and it's like everything I had written at that point in terms of prose poetry, back 20 years. And a lot of the things I tried to publish, I couldn't get them published, because they didn't make sense, like standing out by themselves. And also prose poetry is such a weird genre. But then once they were pulled together into a chapbook, then they all made sense. And then it worked as a chapbook in a way that they didn't work as independent pieces. And so we had a great show. I sold a bunch of chapbooks, and then we made, and then I made 2 more chapbooks. And then I was at a conference giving a talk about something, and the editor-in-chief of Wayne State University Press was there, and we talked and talked and talked, and she loved, and I had the chapbooks, I thrust them into her hands, and she loved them, and she said, "Anytime you want to write a creative nonfiction book, I'm ready." And so I started to write one for her, and it just wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't going anywhere. And actually, I've sent them I've tried 2 other manuscripts, but they weren't quite right. And then during COVID, I finally had time to kind of sit down and look, meaning COVID, once I finished everything that I had to do, because I'm always behind, I always have too much to do, but I wasn't traveling, so I had time. I finished off my to-do list by November. It took most of that first year. And then I went and I looked at what did I have that wasn't published, or I pulled a few from the chapbooks that weren't too published, just a little bit published. And then I put them together and said, I looked at them, it's like, does this look like a book? And I sent it in, and she said, yes, this is it. And so I'm with the university press, which is a totally different experience as some of the others you talked about.
Great, thank you. And it shows putting, putting yourself out there, right? Readings, attending conferences, and, starting to publish step by step, and then that leads to bigger publications. So thank you. It's good advice for all students and emerging writers. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to start answering the questions that people have posted in Q&A. I'm going to have Andrew read some of those. But first, I had one more question, because every one of our panelists works it works cross genre, and also has been like kind of adapting work, and I thought this would be an interesting question. So I'll start with Kalia. You wrote another memoir, The Song Poet, which is about your father, did fantastically well, and now you have adapted it as a libretto for an opera. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like adapting your own work and for a very different medium?
So I never thought I would write songs. I'm not very musical, and I have a voice that my father says is a little bothersome when I sing. And so when the opportunity came to adapt The Song Poet into an opera, I said, go to the people who spent their lives writing librettos. And that's exactly what Minnesota Opera did. They went to somebody who had spent their life in their training doing librettos. But something happened in a virtual meeting where this professional artist said, "Oh, it's so cool. I get to use Galia to say everything I want to say about the world." And I thought, that doesn't feel good. As artists, we know how much time we spend cultivating our voice and how precious those voices are. This isn't the way to enter into this thing. But I'm like, Kalia, you know what? See what this libretto is about. I saw it and it was horrible. It not only betrayed my love of my family and my culture, but it would misrepresent so much of the Hmong American and the refugee experience. And so I thankfully was at a point in my career and in myself where I could say to Minnesota Opera, this can't go on stage. It's not true to the work that I did. It's not true to who I am as a person. This cannot go on the stage. And I had, of course, made notes all over the libretto. And after the company reviewed it, Jamie Andrews came back to me and said, "Kalia, you're absolutely right. Can you do this libretto?" And I said, "Jamie, when I was a graduate student, I went to the Met a few times, but I fell asleep, Jamie. Halfway through, I fell asleep. Opera is not a form that first generation refugee, writers like me from low income houses that we're incredibly familiar with. But if you will allow me to go to all of your shows at different stages of the production, let me learn." Why not? Because I had learned something very important, and I think particularly for the students in the room who come from similar backgrounds like me. So many of us don't know things because we've never gotten the opportunity to learn them. And so I knew that perhaps if given this opportunity, I could do it. And of course, I could do it. I studied, I saw what other people did, I saw what I liked and what I didn't like, went back to my book, and so this libretto is written. And in March of 2023, it'll have its world premiere. It is the first opera by Minnesota Opera to have already sold out 6 months before the show. Am I nervous? Yes. Am I excited? Oh, so very much. I hope and I believe that it'll open up many doors for not only performers of Asian descent, but so many writers and from new American immigrant communities, refugee communities. So super exciting. The Song Poet and Kao Kalia Yang as a librettist. It's sometimes we don't know how to dream about the things we become.
Well, thank you so much. That's really just fantastic advice. Again, right? Like, at first you didn't feel like you could do it, and then someone else does it, and they ruin it. They don't understand the story, but your story, your community, what you want to communicate. And as you said, you can learn. Everyone can learn. So students take this, to heart. So, may not know the form yet, but you can learn it. Fantastic. Thank you. And I hope this could someday come to San Francisco, the San Francisco Opera. I would love to see this here. So Ruben, you had said earlier, when we were talking before this started, that you actually teach video poetry courses, and that you've adapted many poems into like a film and video form. Can you talk a little bit about that adaptation process?
Sure. So I would say about a decade ago, as I started finding more and more literary venues going online, I became very interested in how poems could expand their reach in a visual medium. And so I taught myself many different skills, including how to use Adobe Premiere, iMovie, Movie Maker. These are different types of software, some that come automatically with an operating system, a Mac or a PC. And I just took it upon myself to turn to poems in different collections that really spoke to me. One of the early poems that I looked at was a poem by David Tomas Martinez called "The Mechanics of Men," and like many poems, there are a lot of images in poems, and so I thought, well, what's one way that I can transfer or translate what's happening on the page into video. And over the years, as we know, personal video has become very easy to manage on your phone, outside of a computer or a desktop. So I began just really breaking things down, thinking about image, thinking about sound, thinking about how text on the screen might work, and just really playing with a combination of all of these different forms of communication. And I tried my hand at doing it with my own work, but I was really interested in doing this for other people, similar to my my interest in editorial work. So I approached different poets, and over time, I ended up getting permission from poets like Roger Reeves, a poet and playwright named Dan O'Brien, Charlotte Pence, and just using their poems and finding images and music online that was royalty free. That was something that was really important. So I went onto archive.org. It's a great website. You can find lots of archived audio and video, as well as different texts. And I just started pulling down different elements of sound and image and playing with them. So I eventually taught myself how to become really skilled at putting all these different elements together and being able to tell a visual story of a written work. And this was way before the idea of a video essay or a cinepoem was something that was much more popularized than popular now. I know that Tri-Quarterly is really a magazine out of Northwestern that has its own cinepoem category, and there are many others. But this process just became really fascinating to me as a form of translation and ways to reach audiences and perhaps even bridge culture and language through image and sound. So I began to teach this as a graduate course in the writing and publishing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts many years ago, and still today I still do it on occasion. But I just love the idea of text being able to reach wider audiences through images and through sound.
That is so fascinating. I'm not good at that kind of thing, but it sounds like it would be so much fun to do. If you don't mind, I don't know if you can put in chat, is there a link to any of these poems that you've made into videos that you could share? Or if not, you can email it me and I'll send it to students later. Francis, I had asked you I see you put it into chat. You had done a digital kind of poem video for the Smithsonian. Could you tell everyone a little bit about that process?
Yeah, it's the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center a few years ago had an exhibit called I think it was called Beyond Bollywood. And it was the first time they had ever had Asian American content in the Smithsonian. And it was about the Indian American experience. And as part of that, they realized that they didn't have any content, artistic content about the H-1B visa. And so the Smithsonian put out a call for art. And now the Smithsonian never does this, never. And so they put out a call for art, and I happened to see it, and I, had been working with a photographer, and what they'd said was, of all the entries that they get, whichever one is deemed, quote unquote, first place, right? The best one they would put in the Smithsonian. And then like the other ones, the runners up, they would be in a digital archive. And I told my friend, well, there's no way we're going to get first place, because first place is going to be like a sculpture or a painting or something more traditional art. So let's aim for second place. And I've never done this before either, but we aimed for a video, something digital that could live in this digital archive that they were going to create. And it worked. And so we, this friend and I, we wrote about kind of the South Asian American and H-1B experience. It's actually it's broadly about the Asian American experience, but like some of the details are very specifically South Asian. And it was, our conversations and my work, and I put it together, the written form, and then he put the photos. You can see some of the photos are here, but in black and white. And so we put that together. And then one of my friends happened to have a husband with a sound studio in the basement. And so he helped me record, and then he said, oh, you need a soundscape. And I'm like, what's a soundscape? And so he put, the sound in the background of like a market, an Indian market in the background, and then the sound of a tabla, that's kind of like the heartbeat of the poem. And he put all that together. And then, my friend, the photographer, was overseas in Bangladesh at the time. So he recorded his piece with friends from MIT and sent that in. And so we put all that together. And then we had another friend who knew how to do video, and she put all that together. And so we sent it to the Smithsonian. And it was great. It was exhibited once in Philadelphia, and then I stuck it in a chapbook, and it's in my new book as well.
So great advice also. It's like, again, working across forms, Ruben said he taught himself, you reached out to community and friends, and so got them to help you. And so you could keep ownership and make it tell the story that you wanted to tell. So that's really good advice as well. Thank you. And so everyone look in chat, you can, save that link and watch it at home. And then this is the final question I'm going to ask, and then we're going to go to the Q&A. So Joan, you have adapted work, and you have work being adapted as movies. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think I'm going to talk about the poem that got made into the film, because it was, like all of us, so serendipitous how it happened. I had written a poem about Lawrence Ferlinghetti based on 3 dreams that I had. And I was on a radio show with a person who is a dream expert, and she asked me to read the poem. And her husband happened to be listening to the show, and he's a filmmaker. He said, oh my God, this poem is so visual. We have to make it into a movie. So I went to LA, he had a studio, we made it into a movie, and we put it up on YouTube, and it got some hits. And I started to send it around to small film festivals, just indie film festivals. Well, as you know, Ferlinghetti died about 3 years ago. And all of a sudden, 20 international film festivals wanted the film. So that was just kind of a little bit like the Smiths, all these stories are just, it's just right place, right time kind of thing. Anyway, it was a very, very intense process. He wanted me to be the speaker in the film, and I was really shy about that, and we had to do take after take, and of course I couldn't read from my book. I had to memorize every single line, every word. I thought I was going to die. I mean, it was really, really exhausting. So, but I wanted to also mention I had another serendipitous experience, which is that I entered a poem into Poets 11, which is a San Francisco citywide poetry contest. And they do an anthology at the end of the contest. I get a call from a musician in San Francisco who has gone through the anthology that he found in the San Francisco library system. And could he please write music to my piece? And what an amazing experience and then he had an opera singer sing the words and he had the music, and it's been played around San Francisco and it's also up on YouTube. And it's a really beautiful experience, especially to see your work. I always keep using the word exalted. You know, it takes your words that you've written. I think you're going to find this about your Hmong memoir of the song poet. It's like, here's your work, but then it's like, whoo, it becomes a different animal, you know? And I really like what Ruben's doing because it's a DIY, everybody can do it. You don't have to wait for the serendipity or wait for someone to find you. So yeah, that's happened a couple of times. And I've also gotten approached by a producer who's interested in doing some kind of screenplay or movie or series from my novel Extreme. So we'll see what happens with that. Those film projects can be glacial. So I'm not holding my breath, but yeah.
But good advice. See, it's some of it is serendipity, but some of it is like you put yourself out there, right? You write the works, you got them out there, you give readings, you attended, you put together chapbooks, you wrote the memoir, right? You taught yourself this, you found it, you were, you entered the contest, right? It's not, you can't sit at home and nothing. You have to put your work out there. And then once the work is out there, it blossoms and grows sometimes in very unexpected ways. All right. So Andrew, I'm going to let you go through the Q&A so someone can hear someone besides my voice and go through some of these questions. You're muted.
Yeah, we have a question from Joseph. What advice do you have for older students, I'm 40, getting out there to achieve graduation and or publication?
You know, I was reminded of I have a friend who published a novel at the age of 51, and he's writing for the New Yorker and the New York Times. His name's Edward Kelsey Moore, and he has like multiple books. You know, so I don't think, I think age is something that people throw around a lot, and there's some contests that have age limits, but I don't think you're ever too old or too young to write.
I'll
Joan?
say something. I would say, and this is what I teach in my book, You Can Be a Winning Writer, start to build your reputation today. So in other words, even if it's a review, if it's a short article, if it's a poem, anything, a personal opinion piece, comb all of the calls for submissions, comb Poets and Writers, get your name out there. And because when you go to publish a larger piece, the first question you're going to be asked is, have you published fiction or whatever your genre is? Or what is your publishing resume? And it's really important. And I admire that some folks really want to be paid for their work, but I just assume that the first years, it's okay. You just put it out there. So, you know, you have to commit to a series of submissions, and seriously, not just, oh, I submitted 2 times and nothing happened, so I gave up. You know, that's just really need to be consistent. Yeah.
Great advice. Anyone else on?
Yeah, we have another question from Alondra. I wanted to ask if traditional publishing was always the publishing route all of you had thought of pursuing. Was there a time where you considered self-publishing?
I'll go. I have a little bit of comment to say to the first question and then this one. You know, the size of our dreams don't change. I thought they would. You know, when I was 20, I thought, my God, such big dreams, Kalia. I'm 41, soon to be 42, and the size of my dreams have not wavered. In fact, they've not diminished in size or quantity. They've grown in complexity, and I think that is part of the wisdom of growing older, the perspective and our ability to see ourselves in light of a bigger world. The reality, and all of us, I think, will agree, is that as writers and artists, you can never compare yourself or your journey to anyone else's. That's the moment your heart begins to slow down. That is the moment that the artistry in you ages. And so to understand that where you are is a fresh place of beginning, I think is the healthiest way to look at the practical journey, because this is a passion endeavored, and it takes a great deal of persistence. I think that's what we're all kind of saying again and again in different ways. For me, the self-publishing route, to answer the second question, was never really a feasible pathway, because I understood, I think correctly, that as a woman of color, as a Hmong American woman from a fairly unknown history, neglected history, overlooked history, abused history, for me to make an emergence into the literary landscape, I had to come from a literary press. And I knew in many ways that that first book had to be for adults, that it had to be in many ways nonfiction, that I could do everything else after. The children's books could come after, the fiction can come after, but I understood how important that would be. Again, I've always thought that leaders are individuals who walked paths transparently so that others could willingly and voluntarily follow. And I wanted to be an example of that, if my work was going to have any merit for my community at all. So self-publishing wasn't a feasible pathway for me the way I saw it. Plus, I think I'm so much of a writer. I'm not great at marketing. I'm not great at selling myself. And so in many ways, I needed a team to see how best to present me initially to a bigger world. And the way they've presented me has changed because I've changed. In the beginning, it was so easy for particularly reading groups to say, Kau Kalia Yang is the American dream. You have a kid born in the refugee camps of one nation, raised in the housing projects of another. You give her one of the best education that money can buy. This is it. The dream is alive and it is well. But I know it's not alive and well, because if it is, how come I know so many people who are so smart, who are so loving, who are so kind, trapped within the systems that are set to oppress certain populations. So that narrative has changed because I've changed, and I've been able to grow strong enough so I can stand up to them and test the mettle of that kind of ignorant but easy place of beginning, place of understanding, if you will. And I say place of understanding carefully, because that is the purpose of all art, to deepen our understanding of each other's experiences, to make transparent the beauty of the human heart. That is the purpose of art. Everything else is beautiful and adds to it, but we cannot walk away from the gift, the true gift of art.
Well, thank you. That was really beautifully stated and very powerful and empowering. Thank you so much for saying that. Anyone else have any feelings about self-publishing? Is it something that you've thought about or wanted to do or have done?
I think self-publishing is to give an alternative view, is a good way for those of us with non-traditional backgrounds to get past gatekeepers. Because to sell your book idea to someone who has no idea who you are, where you come from, is a hard sell. So sometimes it's easier to just either do it yourself or do it with friends, or find a small press that you have a little bit more flexibility and you can get in. And then, if it does well, the big presses can come and buy it from you, right? Like Paolini's books were self-published. What were those called? The Dragon, Aragon, right? You students have all read Aragon, I know. So that started off as self-published book. And there's another one, the vampire girl. I forgot her name.
Twilight?
But no, not that one. Another one. This woman, she just wanted enough money to go to. So you have to think about, what do you want to get out of this, right? And there's a woman who wanted to get to a Star Trek convention, and she didn't have enough money for gas. So she found, looked around. What had she already written? She put it up online. She sold it for 99 cents each. And because the cost was so low, people were willing to take a risk, right? And not only did she make enough money to go to her Star Trek convention, eventually she was like a millionaire by, her early 20s. But it's a totally different marketing strategy. It's nothing at all, it's like what you would get from a traditional press. And I teach at the community, I teach creative writing at the community college, and I have a lot of seniors who just want to write a book for their children or grandchildren. So it's a really much smaller, target. But the hard part about self-publishing, as Kalia mentioned, is you have to know the business, and you have to know marketing, and you have to know how to format things, and you have to know when to hire out. So like I did chapbooks, but I had a book designer design the cover and do the layout. She taught me how to sew. These are you can't really tell, but these are hand sewn books. She taught me how to do that. But also there's one last point I'll stop with. It's possible to disguise the self-publishingness of your book if you want legitimacy, right? You put any printer, can do this kind of a cover. So that's not it. You can buy an ISBN number and you can create your own publishing company with a name, but you won't have a lot of reach, right? Because it'll look like a book, it'll feel like a book. You can go to poetry readings and sell them in the back and keep all the money. That's the good part. But you won't get into like book conferences, and you won't be able to make, millions of dollars. But it's a great way to get past gatekeepers.
Thank you.
Okay, here's another question from Q&A. And some of you have already spoken to this. From Rachel, I'm curious to hear about your experiences promoting your work, particularly how you learned to discuss your work with audiences that may be new to it.
Anyone want to go first with that?
I just talked, so I'll keep it short. Zoom is great. It's easier to get everywhere. Otherwise, it's a lot of driving, it's a lot of hustling. And your friends, use your friends and your relatives. Go visit your relatives and set up a book reading while you're there. Do open mics.
Well, I would say that this is where we go back to professional organizations like PEN or the Association of Journalists and Authors, or the Women's National Book Association, or the Authors Guild, California Writers Club. Every state has a writing society, and when you join them, you say, I have a new book, can I promote my book through same thing with National Book Critics Association. We have an outlet to promote all of our work to the whole Book Critics Association. So I'm a big one for joining, no matter how small they seem, organizations to start to build up your reputation and promote your work there. And then, of course, when we're not in a pandemic, getting friendly with your local booksellers and trying to get onto their list.
I'll just add a little bit. Initially it was hard to sell my books because my books are not the sexiest books. They don't have the sexiest covers, the content. I'm writing about wars. I'm writing about poverty. I'm writing about miscarriage and infant loss. I'm writing about grief. And these are not very sexy topics in a grief-averse society, I think, which ours is. But what we found out early on in my career is that wherever I would go, that the books would sell. They were following the public speaking, and I would be dishonest if I said I made my living because of the writing alone. It is my public speaking that allows me to do the writing, if that makes sense. So I do a lot of public speaking. For example, today I did 2 talks. This is my 3rd talk of the day, which is why I'm already in pajamas and I have my shawl and I've already showered because I'm going to go to bed after this. But you have a captive audience, right? If you go to a place where you have a captive audience, as opposed to me going to a bookstore, hoping that people would trickle in, maybe you get 10, 15. If you go to a conference, you get 200, 300, and they're sitting there and they're waiting to listen to you. You don't have to sell your books then. Because if initially every single book, and I think we'll all agree, everything we do is a piece of our beating heart. The heart is complicated, so these things are layered and textured and different. But we are our biggest brand ambassadors in so many ways. And so that is how my career has been made. Where I go, then people will pick up my books. They're not picking up Hao Kalia Yang's books because her name is so beautiful or her author picture is so intriguing. That is not how this operation is working. But definitely, I think finding pathways to garnering captive audiences, I think that is it's been a very smart and a strategic pathway for me and my journey as a writer.
Great, thank you. Ruben?
I'll say briefly that I think that I was an early adapter of social media and the internet. I think social media is complicated these days, but there are certainly some social media outlets that I think are still really useful and valuable for book promotions. People make book trailers these days. People make short little video stories. Video is a great way to garner attention versus a static image or just text. I think making online connections, particularly over the last 2 years, now that everyone's become so adept to video, as Frances said, Zoom is great. Joan used DIY. I'm a big DIY kind of person, do it yourself. And so, I started my own literary reading series through Zoom. I reach out to different people through social media, just connecting. You gotta connect first. You can't just, can't come out with like, hey, I've got a book. You've got to understand that everyone's a human being and everyone has other things on their mind. And so it's really important to just connect first. And then when it's time for you to put a book in the world, you have a network of friends that you can share your work with. And so that's my piece of advice.
That's great advice. As everyone has been saying, everybody's writing from within several communities, right? And so there's like the personal community, there's a family community, and then there's also a literary community, right? And we do not do this alone. So as every one of our panelists has talked about, is like building those communities, reaching out to those communities, working across communities, and that also helps to promote the works. Let me please put some more questions in. We've only got like 5 minutes left. So while you can be typing in your questions quickly, I've got another question for the group. Pitching. This is something that everyone who is a freelancer, and even sometimes people who aren't freelancers, do it occasionally. You know an outlet, you've got an idea, you want them to publish it, or advice on pitching.
Can I be the
Yes.
voice of reality here? The word on the street is that agents get 900 packages a week on their desk. So the first thing you have to do is calibrate expectations, because I coach writers and I have writers that come to me and say, oh, I'm going to write and then I'm going to get an agent and then I'm going to do this. I'm like, great. But most of the writers I know have either networked their way into a book deal or like Kalia, I am totally supportive of, proactively submitting. It's competitive. Again, publishers also are getting tremendous amounts of work. I think once you get that first book and your writing resume starts to shine with awards and with books and with appearances, your package is going to the other pile. So that's why I always go back to build your reputation, because even Kalia, even if she had never published one word, but she won $1,000 at the contest. she went to Columbia, which is no small thing. So, you know, her package is probably going to go a little bit over there too. So I'm just saying, you know, the submission package, the query, the pitch can be perfect, and it's still going to be a challenge. But there are
Step by step. Yes.
there are books, there are all kinds of articles online about writing the perfect query letter, writing the perfect pitch package. My book covers it, and tons of books cover it. So read and know what you're doing before you burn bridges, for sure. Really take it very, very seriously, because when you go out to a publisher or an agent, that's your name. And the world, it looks big, but it's not that big. It's small. People remember each other, and always be professional. Always. Don't call agents. Don't bother them. That's all. Yeah.
Joan, I love the practical perspective that you're sharing. It is very true. You know, so I have agents now. I have a children's book agent, an adult book agent, a speaking agent, but I do still pitch. And I think that's an important part of the thing, because I'm interested in writing for publications like Al Jazeera. The international perspective is important to me. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I knew I wanted to write for them, and I saw that they were looking. And so I wrote up the, you know, just a query email. This is an idea that I want to write. We're in a pandemic. I want to write about how to tell stories to children. And I knew that was coming from left field, but it was also original enough. I just entered the realm of children's literature, and I was beginning to think about it in a very timely way. And so I pitched, and they said yes. And that becomes, you know, an ongoing relationship. I've been like 12, 13 different pieces for them. I wanted to be edited by Hanif. And I knew that Hanif was working for Medium. And so when I saw that Medium was looking, I purposely submitted, because we have things to learn from each other. Our contemporaries are our teachers. And so I pitched, and Hanif said, sure. So I wrote, you know, 2 pieces for Medium. And I'm like, oh, I learned, you know, how Hanif, and this is Hanif Abdurraqi for any of you who are questioning who this is, how Hanif edits. And that was so interesting for me. You know, I have so much respect for Mei Li Kai's work, and now I see Mei Li teaching beautifully on the Zoom, right? This is how I learn. And I think these kinds of actions allow us to build those necessary relationships, but also to continue growing as writers. So pitching is a continual part of what I do. It continues to be, I think, an important part. If I want to understand the process entirely, if I'm going to be equipped to teach young writers, I teach at the University of Minnesota's MFA program, then I have to know what they're going through. I have to be in the river with them. Otherwise, my reading of the current is going to be off.
Great, thank you. That was fantastic advice. Francis, do you want to comment on that? Or Ruben, do you have anything to comment about pitching?
Yeah, with pitching, this is, you know, what they say, start in action, be in the middle of it, make it visual, make it active, but also show why you are the one to tell the story, right? Why the story belongs to you, why you have the skills and you can tell the story. And then also, I would suggest try to publish, like if you have a longer work, try to publish a short part of it. Like a lot of the, I write mostly Asian American, I write in Asian America. A lot of the books that have come out lately started as essays, you know, for different online publications. Crying in H Mart started as an essay. Sorry, I shouldn't do this off the top of my head, but a lot of them started as essays. I know that Catherine Reynolds Lewis wrote an article about parenting and education. It was the #1. It got the most hits ever in the history of Mother Jones magazine. And so once she had that data point, let's call that, the publishers came to her and they said, and she could say, I got more hits than anyone else ever in the history of Mother Jones magazine. Like, wow, when you say that. And so then she went and followed up that article with writing a whole book. And so magazines and,
Great.
and I guess newspapers, journals. Yeah.
Great advice, Francis. Thank you. Ruben, do you want to have the last word on, and you can finish up on any advice on pitching.
Sure. So the most recent thing that I pitched was I was really interested in putting together a folio for of Latinx poets. I'm Latinx poets, Latinx writing all the time, and I did it via social media. I just said, I said, I haven't seen this. There was a gap, so I was really looking to fill something that someone hadn't done yet. And that was putting together a folio of poems by LGBTQIA plus Latinx poets. And I got messages sent to me from different magazines. And ultimately, I ended up going with Pleiades, which is out of the University of Central Missouri. And, they gave me about 45 pages in their issue. It's the spring 2022 issue. And I worked on it over the last year, and it was just simply by just asking just a simple query to a literary magazine. I did something similar with my new book, this collection of essays about poetry. I followed up online with different presses, university presses, because I knew I wanted it to be somewhat of a textbook, and just followed their guidelines to a T. And some presses were interested, some weren't, and then I just did a little bit of research about which press had the best catalog that would align with my work, and so that's how I went with this press. But it was just simple queries, just sending out emails and following all of the guidelines that I see online for a particular press, and that was it.
Mei Lee, I know we're at the end, but I'd like to end on a positive note, because I know what I said was a little harsh. One of my books, I went outside the box, and it was a poetry collection. I was having a very hard time placing it. So what I did is I went back to every small literary press that had published any of the poems in the collection, and I said, who do you know that's looking for a manuscript? I got one response, one publisher, and that was, so yeah, what Ruben's saying, and all of you, I do want to end on that note, that it is going out there, at least trying and throwing your hat in the ring, right?
Yes, thank you. As everyone said, it's step by step. One step leads to the next step. It's knowing yourself, right? Knowing what you're like, why you're writing something, so you can explain it to an editor, a publisher. It's knowing, your community. No one does this alone. And it's taking that chance, right? Taking the chance, stepping forth with, the best work you've got, and with intention, and everyone builds their career that way, step by step. So thank you, Frances, Kalia, Ruben, Joan, Andrew, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has attended. Thank you. And I hope that you will go forth and take courage and start taking your pathways to publication. So thank you so much. Good night, everybody. Okay, goodbye.